With reaction to these developing stories, author of American Marxism, #1 book all around the world, and the host of Life, Liberty, and Levin, Mark Levin. Mark, good morning to you.
Morning.
Good morning, Steve.
You know, people who've been watching Afghanistan for a while saw this coming, and people thought, you know, he can't possibly go through with it. He did, and now it's absolute chaos. There are tens of thousands of people who need to get out of Afghanistan, and right now they can't.
You know, Steve, let me take a little different position on this than I think most people are. Number one, 2,500 non-combat troops, backed up potentially by 1,000 combat troops, 6,000 to 7,000 NATO troops, and we had neutralized Afghanistan. We had neutralized Afghanistan. I was at the Reagan Library last week, and we had 1,500 people. So at 1,000, 2,500 people, a massive country with awful terrain. We had an impenetrable air base in northern Afghanistan, and we had neutralized it. So people say 20-year war. What are they talking about, 20-year war? Do we have a 70-year war in North Korea and South Korea? The whole goal wasn't just to take out Osama bin Laden. It was to make sure Afghanistan couldn't be used to attack us again.
Right.
Taking out bin Laden, of course, was a priority. But he would be replaced by another and another and another. So the whole goal there was to keep our intelligence there, to keep the fighting there. And then I hear the Afghan troops won't fight. They lost 69,000 men. That's more than we lost in Vietnam or Korea. They were fighting, except in the middle of the night when we left our air base. Why in the hell would we pull the military out before the civilians out?
Right.
We left our air base. They had no air cover. We trained them to fight like we fight with air cover. We pulled out our federal contractors, which meant even their Air Force and their helicopters couldn't be maintained anymore. They were going to lose parts. Of course they have a corrupt government. We know that. Most of these places we go do have corrupt governments. So I'm thinking to myself, if we could rewind the clock and have 2,500 non-combatants and backed up by 6,000 or 7,000 NATO troops and have our base back, and with all this horrific activity that's going on in Afghanistan, would we do it? We sure as hell would do it. That's number one. Number two, our southern border is still wide open. We're in a more dangerous position we were than on 9/11. We now have nation-state enemies like China, Russia, Iran, working with terrorist organizations. That's the new axis of the enemy. This is prior to 9/11. We didn't even have that. We have that now. And the southern border is still wide open. Our border patrol is overwhelmed. ICE is undermined. We should be securing that border immediately, so we're not hit again. We are overwhelmed down there. That's number two. Number three, the idea that Donald Trump would just do what Joe Biden did is a lie. It's a damnable lie, and I'll give you some quick examples. Number one, we still have troops in Iraq. We still have troops in Syria. Why? Because Donald Trump is not an ideologue. He's a practical man. He's a principled man. And he decided, I'll take most of the troops out of Iraq, but I can't take all of them. I'll take most of the troops out of Syria, but I can't take all of them. And he didn't. And so he looks at what's going on the ground. He makes decisions based on that. You heard what Admiral Kellogg had to say about their plan was nothing like what Biden did. Everybody get out, military first. That wasn't the plan of the Trump administration. Trump took out Soleimani when Iran hit us in Iraq. He took out the head of ISIS. He destroyed ISIS in the caliphate. When Syria, he wanted nothing to do with Syria, was gassing its own people twice. He hit them twice. The idea that Donald Trump is anything like Joe Biden is a disgusting effort by Joe Biden not to take responsibility for what he has done. We have not only a human catastrophe. There's Pakistan. Pakistan is weak. Pakistan, pretty much a third of that country is already controlled by terrorists. That's where Osama bin Laden was hiding out. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. You think the Taliban is going to sit quietly and Al-Qaeda is going to sit quietly? You've got Iran on their border now aligning with the Taliban. You've got China that's making alliances with the Taliban. You notice the Russians haven't shut their embassy, so they have some kind of deal going on. India is potentially threatened, our ally. This is a big deal. What Joe Biden has just done is completely change the geography completely changed our national security situation. We now have heightened terrorism concerns from the Department of Defense. So I just wanted to lay out a few of these points.
Right.
I'm not one of those that say there's a 20-year war, and so we should have taken out every single soldier out of there. It was neutralized. We weren't hit from Afghanistan after 9/11. Not a single soldier was killed for the last 18 months. We have non-combat military personnel there. Our air base was impenetrable. It was powerful. Now we don't have any intelligence. We have nothing. And the idea that you shut an air base, you don't tell your ally, American citizens are there. They don't even know how many. There could be 13,000. There could be 20,000. And you're negotiating with the Taliban. Let me ask you folks this question. What are we negotiating? What are we giving them? You know, the Taliban's working with Iran. You know what Iran's telling them? This guy Biden's a pushover. He'll give you whatever you want. What exactly are the negotiations going on to allow us to get our people
we
out?
froze their central bank, and they probably were going to have to pay off to get them back, and it's our money to begin with. And Ghani reportedly left with millions of our dollars in a chopper and 4 separate cars. But, Mark, when people are watching you just now and they've served in Afghanistan and they look down and they are missing a leg or a limb or the invisible scars of this war, you pointed out something great. For 20 years, we have not been hit because of what they did, number one. And number two, what Joe Biden did is defy his own Defense Department, define his own chief of staff. He was against the CIA and his intelligence unit. So I ask you, who told him to do this? Who is he listening to? And are you more than ever worried if he's capable of having this job?
Listen, Ryan, I do things, I guess, that are unpopular from time to time. I said the Republicans in the House should be talking about his impeachment. You don't defy a Supreme Court decision the way this man did, willy-nilly, when it comes to rents and the attack on private property rights. You don't keep a border open when people are coming across the border who have the virus. When people are coming across the border who are MS-13, who are drug pushers. And now we have more terrorists coming across than ever before, the former Border Patrol chief said, particularly under these circumstances. You have a president of the United States who is mentally incapable. And I don't mean because he has dementia. He's always been mentally incapable of being president of the United States. Don't people remember that ISIS built its caliphate under Obama and Biden? That we talk about these 5 terrorists that were released from Guantanamo Bay. But it's okay, folks. They're not going to be in Afghanistan. And they promised us they won't go to the battlefield. And I want to add this, Brian. Who are the buffoons who are embracing the Taliban propaganda now that they're going to treat women differently and so forth and so on? Do you know Khomeini, when he took over Iran, said exactly the same thing? We're going to treat our women properly. We're going to have free speech. You know who else said that in 1936? Joseph Stalin, under his constitution that he put in place. When the hell are the media in this country and the flunkies who sound like the media in this country going to get over this? There are evil people. These people attacked us. They gave safe harbor to Obama. They now control Afghanistan. They didn't even control the northern part of Afghanistan. Thanks to Biden, they control more of Afghanistan than they did before 9/11. Our border's wider open now than it was before 9/11. This president refuses to do anything about it. Well, what are we supposed to do? Just sit here and talk about it? I want the House Republicans to start talking seriously. I mean, Donald Trump, there's a letter and there's a word in a letter to the Ukrainian president. And look at that. He was trying to go after Biden, and the 2 presidents say, no, he wasn't. Well, we're going to impeach him anyway. And then we'll impeach him when he's a private citizen. Joe Biden deserves to be impeached and removed from office. That discussion needs to begin right now.
Mark, I don't know if you saw the interview. We talked to an American who is trapped in Afghanistan, went over there to take care of his sick father, and he can't get out. And he is too scared that the Taliban's going to know where he lives and come and kill him and his entire family. But it was very important for him to do this interview with us, even though he's putting his life on the line. Here's his message to Joe Biden.
We're struggling with. We need an immediate help. Mr. Biden, please help all these Afghans who did support you, who helped you. These people deserve this, that I need to do this for them. As a human,
Mark, how are we going to get these Americans out safely?
Well, I don't know that we are. I mean, if the Taliban chooses, it's going to have the biggest number of Americans kidnapped in American history. I know what Donald Trump would do. Do you remember several years ago, even as he was pulling some troops out, the Taliban were on the move. They were building an offensive, thousands of them, and they were in these tunnels. Remember this? Yep. And he dropped the biggest ordnance we have, short of nuclear weapons, and killed them all. That's how you deal with this. You tell the head of the Taliban, we're going to kill you. We're going to kill your family. We're going to kill all your... This is all they understand. Don't people... They're terrorists. They're terrorists. They already struck us. And so that's all they understand. But you know what? I hate to say this, but under Joe Biden, does anybody really think that he has the courage or the strength or the intelligence to do what needs to be done to get our people out of there?
Right.
You're negotiating with them. You already negotiated with them. They're surrounding they're surrounding the Kabul airport. And people have been asking the press secretary, the press secretary of state, the press secretary of defense, because all the main figures are hiding right now, and they've asked him, right, how are you going to get Americans to the airport? What is their answer? They don't know.
They don't know. And because there's people outside Kabul. There's Americans outside Kabul, and they've been shut off. They're checkpoints now. So unless we're going to march and we might have to, unless we're going to march our men down those streets and reopen it ourselves, knowing that they're going to be targets for the Taliban, how are we going to convince them? What leverage do we have? Do we have to let more guys out of Gitmo in order to get our guys back?
Well, that's my point. What exactly are these negotiations? We have no cards, because who the hell pulls the military out before they pull your citizens out? Who the hell shuts your air base and doesn't even tell your ally of 20 years about it? I want to remind people, again, this has not been a 20-year war. Afghanistan has been neutralized. We had 2,500 non-combatant troops there, backed up by 6,000 to 7,000 NATO personnel. And the Afghans, you know, I spoke to Colonel Richard Kemp, who was the commander of British forces there, and he said, I was disgusted and offended by this President Biden saying these men didn't fight. They were fighting, and they were fighting near the end, until we pulled our Air Force out, and we pulled out, and we shut that base down. Then they realized we can't win.
Yeah. Mark, as you know, we're going to have a break in about a minute, but we wanted to ask you about the fact that one of the Taliban commanders is somebody we actually had in captivity, one of the commanders down in Gitmo, now calling the shots. We exchanged one of them for Bo Bergdahl.
Five of them.
Yeah,
for Bo Bergdahl.
one of these two guys, though.
Oh, right.
So what do you make of that? Real quick, about a minute.
What do I make of that? When you elect disastrous presidents, you have disastrous consequences. Obama released those 5, as Obama gave pardon to a number of domestic terrorists, as Clinton gave pardon to a number of domestic terrorists, as Carter gave pardon to a number of domestic terrorists. When you show weakness to terrorists and to the enemy, they strike you. And now I'm worried about going forward here. He still won't secure the southern border. That southern border is wide open.
It is.
Does anybody think our enemies don't know that? And I'm concerned we have thousands of American citizens stuck there. I mean, we have individuals in our country, some on TV, some on radio, who seem to think this is all over. Let's just get the hell out. We can't just get the hell out of there now. We are stuck. We're stuck. We have thousands of Americans. What do you think Theodore Roosevelt would do? What do you think Franklin Roosevelt would do? What do you think Ronald Reagan would do? What do you think Donald Trump would do? You think they'd sit back and negotiate with the State Department, or they'd take steps now and say, you're going to give us our people, or we're going to crush you militarily? You got 24 hours. Open that damn airport. We're getting our people. And the clock is ticking now. That's what a leader does.
Mark Levin, American Marxism, #1 book in the country. Good luck on your radio show today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
I wish we had a better story, but we can't keep our eyes off this one. Mark, thanks.